The murder of Jamal Khashoggi made headlines around the world in October 2018, shocking observers and calling into question Saudi Arabia's global standing, including its ties with the United States.
The evidence keeps building in the death of journalist Jamal Khashoggi at Saudi Arabia's consulate in Istanbul, Turkey.
At the heart of the case is Jamal Khashoggi himself, a Saudi journalist and U.S. resident working as a columnist for The Washington Post, who went missing after a visit to the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. The graphic details of his murder, allegedly by Saudi agents, only surfaced over the following weeks.
It's been devastating. Jamal had become an integral part of the Global Opinions team as a writer. From the day that we heard that he went missing to all the twists and turns that have happened since, it's been one of the hardest things that all of us have had to deal with.
The tragedy of Khashoggi's killing is not an isolated case. At least 53 journalists lost their lives in connection with their work in 2018 across 16 countries.
Journalist killings have definitely gotten worse this year compared with the last 2 years. The last 2 years, the number of journalists being killed was on the decline, so we felt a little bit hopeful that that trend might continue, but instead the killings have shot back up again this year, including the number of journalists who were singled out for reprisal murders.
In 2018, at least 34 journalists were targeted for retaliatory murders. One of those cases was the killing of Jamal Khashoggi at the Saudi consulate. Khashoggi often wrote on Middle Eastern politics and had criticized Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who has been accused of responsibility for Khashoggi's murder, including by the U.S. Senate in a unanimous resolution in December.
The way that he was silenced and the brashness and really inhumane way that he was murdered has had reverberations all throughout the journalistic community here in Washington, D.C. and around the world. This sort of murder of anyone, let alone a journalist, inside a consulate, a place where someone is supposed to feel safe, is completely unacceptable by all international norms.
Other attacks this year also took place in locations where journalists may have felt safe in the past. In Slovakia, an investigative reporter named Jan Kuciak was shot dead alongside his fiancée, less than 6 months after another European investigative journalist, Daphne Caruana Galizia, was killed in Malta in 2017.
2 people is not enough necessarily to call something a trend, but it certainly is disturbing to see 2 murders in the European Union, which is obviously a region known for press freedom, in such a short amount of time.
And at the Capital Gazette newspaper in Annapolis, Maryland, the American press suffered its deadliest day in recent memory.
A person who had threatened the paper for years showed up with a gun in the newsroom and killed 4 journalists and someone who worked on the business side at the paper. And that was the single deadliest incident in the history of U.S. media in some time.
The Capital Gazette was not the only site of a mass killing of journalists in 2018. Attacks in the Central African Republic and Colombia also killed multiple journalists at once. But the deadliest single incident this year was in Afghanistan on April 30th, when a person posing as a reporter detonated a suicide bomb in Kabul in a group of other journalists. 9 reporters were killed. In all of these cases, impunity for journalists' killers can have serious implications for press freedom in the future.
Impunity is a huge problem. Our research shows that whenever no one is held to account for someone's murder, other people take a cue from that. Over time, impunity simply perpetuates more violence. That's something that we know.
That sets a very terrible precedent, one that rulers in other parts of the world look at and say, we can get away with these terrible crimes against journalists, against human rights defenders.
In the case of Jamal Khashoggi, where his own government is accused of a role in his murder, that means an open and impartial investigation is essential.
In the Khashoggi case, we feel strongly that the best route toward any kind of justice in his murder is an international investigation led by the UN. CPJ has been calling for an international investigation since shortly after the murder.
The story should be told, we should know exactly what happened to him, and those responsible should be held accountable. Nobody, I think, expected that journalists right up the road, and one of my own colleagues, would suffer the worst possible fate imaginable for doing their jobs.